All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. This is an educational channel, and we try to inform you of great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, and also magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries, generally emanating from obscure sources. And today is our 318th Bible Decode. We focus on things that have been suppressed, things that would make a big difference in your life if you only knew about them, but somebody, the powers that be or that shouldn't be, are trying to banish these writings from your purview by putting them on the very margins so that you have to do a lot of digging to dig them out. And we focused a lot on the Roman origins hypothesis, but many different other ciphers to help you decode the New Testament, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, the mythological approach, the astrotheological approach, the entheogenic approach, the numerological approach, and the approach of looking a lot at ancient Egyptian, ancient Greek, Persian, and Babylonian origins, as well as the mystery schools. And now we're a little bit back toward the Roman origins, but with a twist. We're looking at some of the work of Roman Piso, who you can find a lot on ResearchGate with a few hundred articles. Some of them are even book length. And Piso's thing is that he believes, well, first he believes he is a descendant of the powerful Piso family of Rome in the first centuries, and that just like many of the other Roman origins hypothesis people, that the New Testament was written by the Roman Caesars, in particular by a character named Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, but he defected to the Romans and he became a member of the Roman royal court under Emperor Vespasian around 70 AD. And the Gospels were a story that he wrote and backdated by 40 plus years to the late 20s, early 30s BC. At the very same time, he was working on a history of the war between the Romans and the Jews, and called Jewish War, in 7 volumes. And when you read those two works together, you can figure out that they're written by the same author and for the same reason at the same time, because of the myriad parallels between the two. Now, the motivation for the Romans to write the New Testament was that the Jews were just too hard to handle. They were constantly revolting, insurrecting, and assassinating, terrorist attacks, leading up to this war from 66 until 73 AD, when a number of self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs rose up to overthrow the puppet rulers of Jerusalem and send them packing back to Rome. This caused Emperor Nero to send in the army, led by General Vespasian, who eventually becomes the new emperor. Roman Piso believes that Josephus was the author of the New Testament, but he believes that he was that Josephus was a pen name, and that he was really this character named Arius Piso, and his family. Arius wrote the Gospels, and other members of his family, his children, his younger foster brother, and his grandchildren wrote the rest of the New Testament, along with a whole lot of other books, because he believes that all books written in ancient times, even up to the time of the printing press, were actually written by the royal families. The royals were the only people, whether you're talking about the pharaohs, the kings, the Caesars, the royals are the only people that were writing any type of literature of any kind, regardless of whether it's religion, poetry, literature, science, math, history, philosophy, or whatever. It was all written by the royals, and they used a complex language that calls the royal language in order to conceal the identities of the writers, to conceal the fact that there was only a handful of people that were actually writing books, make it look like there were many people. He shows how Arius Piso wrote under the dozens and dozens of different aliases. Now, you can consider that these Roman royals, they had a bunch of slaves working for them, especially scribes who would write all this stuff down for them. So it wasn't like they were working alone. He could publish a lot of stuff because he had slaves helping him, to do it. A person like me or somebody, I'm not going to be able to write, 100 books in my life, but you might be able to if you have a fleet of slaves helping you out. And that really was one of the main things that they wanted to protect, writing this New Testament, was the institution of slavery and just the basic status quo. And you can see the evidence of that in the feudal system that came out of the Roman Church a few centuries later and lasted for over 1,000 years, using the very New Testament in order to justify the serfdom, the near slavery of all the peasants there in the feudal system. And but so the general idea was to propose a Jewish Messiah who, instead of being somebody who was predicted in the Old Testament to be overthrowing the Roman order and kicking them out of Jerusalem and Judea in general, instead they proposed a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and walking the extra mile and turning the other cheek, and at the same time taking shots at the Jewish rituals and traditions by overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers, the outer perimeter of the temple, and castigating the Jewish vendors selling small animals for the sacrifice at the temple, telling his Jewish disciples to abandon their families and follow him. All of these things are exactly the kinds of things that the Romans wanted out of the Jews. They wanted the Jewish religion to be hijacked and to really have themselves grafted onto the Jewish tradition. They wanted the Jewish society to be pruned or tamed or domesticated, to be able to assimilate them into their empire just like all the other nations. And so they kind of singled out the Jews in many ways, and the Gospels were just one of those. They created another religion called Rabbinical Judaism to help assimilate the Pharisees, the kind of the Jews that were, more in terms of ethics and philosophy and studying the scriptures, whereas the Gospels were more intended to neutralize the Jewish zealots. So Piso writes about those kind of things. Right now, we're focused on, I'm just going over some of my notes from what he has written, what I have read of what he has written. And he's talking about a lot of the Apocrypha. And he contends that really all of the Piso family, their descendants, wrote, not only did they write the Gospels and the epistles and the book of Acts and the book of Revelation, but they wrote all of the Apocrypha as well, the books that didn't make the canon, that didn't make the cut. There are literally dozens of other Gospels out there that didn't make the cut, dozens of other books of Acts that didn't make the cut. And he tries to identify who wrote these things as well. So he talks about how the general epistle of Barnabas is written by Flavius Arrianus, or otherwise known as Arian, son of Claudia Phoebe, who was the wife of Emperor Trajan, who was also in on the game. Even though he wasn't one of the Flavian emperors, he was soon after them. I believe Trajan ruled from 98 until 117 AD. And so, but his son was this guy Arrianus, who wrote the first general epistle of Barnabas in probably about 130 to 135 AD, right about the time of the Bar Kokhba, Second Jewish War. The Epistle of Ignatius to the Ephesians, written by Pliny the Younger, who was the younger foster brother of Arius Piso, and he was also the author of most of the Pauline epistles, along with Justus Piso, one of Arius' sons. And those were written in a later period, not an earlier period, but in a later period between 100 and 110 AD. This is all just according to Piso. I'm just kind of taking this off my notes. You can take it with a grain of salt for sure. And that's what I've done. But Pliny, now the Gospels, particularly the Gospels, but also the rest of the New Testament was written as plays to be performed in front of the masses, the illiterate masses. And they really literally went on barnstorming tours. If you follow the letters of Pliny, you follow him all over, traveling all over the place in this period to all the same places that Paul went in his letters, Rome, and then Corinth, and Galatia, Ephesia, or Ephesus, Philippi, and Colossia, or whatever you call it, Colossae, and Thessalonica. So Pliny takes his travels mirror the travels of Paul in the epistles. Okay, now Aelius Commodus also was the finisher of the Epistle of Ignatius. And Saint Ignatius was another alter ego or alias of Pliny the Younger. So the Epistle of Ignatius to the Magnesians was also authored by Pliny in 114 AD, finished by his son again. Pliny died in, I believe, 114 or 116 AD. Killed in battle. And the Epistle of Ignatius to the Trallians, again by Pliny, perhaps edited or finished by his son. Some indications within the text point to a time in which Pliny was a military man under Domitian, way back in Domitian was the third Flavian emperor from 81 until 95 AD. So this would have been, Pliny was actually born in 62 AD. So this is when he was a youngster. But apparently this text here, this epistle of Ignatius to the Trallians didn't come out till much later. The epistle of Ignatius to the Romans, also authored by Pliny. The epistle of Ignatius to the Philadelphians by Pliny, all between 100 and 110 AD. Same time that the epistles of Paul were coming out. The epistle of Ignatius to the Smyrnians, also by Pliny at that time. And we get to the Shepherd of Hermas, which, as we learned in the previous book, the History of the Bible book, by Bronson Keeler, Shepherd of Hermas was pretty high, in pretty high esteem by many of the church fathers in the early periods, and that was in some of the canons. But it was written by Arian, or otherwise known as Flavius Arianus, 129 to 130 AD, written partially in tribute to some of his own family members, including his mother, and that's again Trajan's wife, Pompeia Plotina, who's also known as Claudia Phoebe. And then she had just died right then at 129 AD. May have been edited by one of Arian's descendants, perhaps Clement of Alexandria, who came much later, I think early 3rd century, late 2nd, early 3rd century. One may note that those who were writing as Origen, early to mid 3rd century, Eusebius, early 4th century, and Jerome, early 5th century, were descendants of Piso as well. The letters of Herod and Pilate were authored by Pliny the Younger in the same time period, 100 to 110 AD. Pliny and Arius were both descendants of King Herod, and therefore could use his name as a tribute or a kind of ancestor worship, in their aliases. And Philo of Alexandria was also a common ancestor of theirs as well. So this is kind of like, Herod was called the Idumean, which is, Arab from those desert areas south and east of Israel, but was really, according to Piso, was really a Hasmonean or a Maccabee of the Jewish dynasty of kings from the 2nd and 1st century BC, when the Jews had a short period of self-government there under the Maccabees, even though it was these guys were pretty hardcore. They kind of forced everybody to get circumcised, or else they killed them, and things like that. Apparently Philo of Alexandria, the relatively famous Greek philosopher who was of Jewish extraction and who was pretty much a contemporary of so-called Jesus, was also in the family and also in on the game. His nephew Tiberius Alexander was an insider to the game. He was one of the main people responsible for getting Vespasian to the throne, and was a close confidant of Emperor Titus, Vespasian's oldest son. Pliny was a direct descendant of Philo, who was also known as Pontius Pilate. The Herodians, I would like to know what his evidence for that is, but I can only wish. The Herodians were given Roman educations and Roman names in addition to their Judean names. Philo of Alexandria was a son of King Herod. Now we get to the Lost Gospel according to Peter. That was authored by Arius Piso and his son Proculus in the period just after 100 AD. The Acts of Paul and Thesia was authored by Pliny and his son in about 116 AD, which is right around the time that Pliny died. He may not have finished it before himself dying. And that's his son Aelius Commodus. His son died in 138 AD, so this may not have even come out until way after that, or until after that. Pliny's son was also known as Licinius Commodus, also known as L. Aelius Verus Caesar. He was adopted by Emperor Hadrian, who was the emperor from 117 to 138, and named his successor, but he passed away with tuberculosis in January of 138, just before Hadrian himself died. So he was on track to become the new Caesar, but did not make it. And I think that Julius Piso is also involved in the story. He's one of the sons of Arius Piso and the author of Revelation, who was eventually executed by Hadrian, I believe. And he thought that he was in line for to succeed Hadrian, but he was mistaken and eventually executed. Don't quote me on that. I believe that's how Piso describes the story. So don't quote me on the somewhat hearsay version that Roman Piso is giving us anyway. There were coins minted with his image on them, being Aelius Verus Caesar, the son of Pliny, and including some with Hadrian's bust on one side and Aelius's on the other. Domitius Ulpian, who's also known as Origen, and Diocasius and Macrinus. Okay, now where seems like he's kind of stopped talking about the Apocrypha here, and he's just laying on a whole lot of names of maybe he already listed the names of the first 10 bishops of Rome, which eventually become popes, and now we know that all the Roman emperors and all of the popes were all descended from Arius Piso, according to Roman Piso, all the way up to and maybe even through Charlemagne in the 8th century, and that many famous people nowadays are also related, including many of our prominent politicians nowadays, and prominent writers throughout the last couple hundred years, many of whom have attempted to write to reveal this stuff, but had to do so in coded language that you have to be able to kind of understand in order to know what the game was. The main character involved is William Shakespeare, who wrote as a woman named Amelia Bassano Lanier, according to Joseph Atwill and John Hudson. And I think that's pretty airtight to me. Amelia Bassano had many, many different characteristics that would have suited her perfectly to write about the subjects that she was writing about. And she was a Jewish woman who saw her work as a counterattack against the Gospels, against the New Testament. She saw the New Testament properly as an attack of psychological warfare by the Romans against the Jews. And so she wrote all of Shakespeare's plays in order to be a counterattack by the Jews against the Gentiles. Okay. Now he's just listing a whole lot of names here. Marcus Aurelius, and some of their aliases. I think Marcus Aurelius was Pope Soter, if I'm not mistaken, and Eusebius was Pope Constantine. Marcus Aurelius, upon his birth, was looked upon by the royal families of the time as their savior, or the one who would save the royal oligarchy. His great uncle, Julius Piso, inserted him into Revelation when he was just a young boy, putting him in by the use of the word precious. So if you see precious in the book of Revelation, that is actually referring to a very young Marcus Aurelius. The Christian church up until that time existed virtually only on paper. The church fathers and other Christian writers were all related to each other and cooperated with each other to produce the illusion of a vibrant religion that was very popular. Christianity was exposed by Abelard Reuchlin, who kind of worked independently from Piso at the start, but then they began to collaborate until his death in 2015. Reuchlin realized that in order to do the work that he did, it had consumed a substantial portion of his life, and in the process, but to him it was a duty that he knew he had to do. You see, both he and I realized that there were thousands of people who had given their lives in order to try to prevent Christianity from becoming a reality, and virtually no one knew that, or who these people were. To us, it was important to let the world know this. Now, he refers to a book that is called Jewish Expressions on Jesus. What most historians had thought was simply a few Jewish revolts or uprisings, in reality was a very long war, begun as a rift between the two Jewish sects of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, about 135 BC, and going all the way up to 135 AD, at the end of the Bar Kokhba uprising. Rome was brought into it by the losing side, the Sadducees. The Hasmoneans and then the Herodians were on the side of the Sadducees. The Flavians and Arius Calpurnius Piso, through his mother, were descendants of King Herod. Pliny created the first churches in Bithynia and Pontus, commencing about the year 100. Once Acts of the Apostles was completed. But that was not his first tour of duty there, nor did his tour cover a mere few years, ending about 112. St. Ignatius, his epistle to the Ephesians, Trajan appears as Fronto, and now he goes over the royal language a little bit. A lot of times they use in their aliases, they switch some consonants or insert vowels. They also use several languages at once. And so a word that might actually mean something in a different language is then changed into that language. Like Gallus, I believe Gallus means like rooster in Latin, and so the character is known as Gallus in one place, but then maybe as the Greek word for rooster in a different alias. I was also seen as L, and vice versa. Thus, we have L for Lucius, inherited from Arius's uncle, who was kind of his adoptive father after his real father was executed by Nero for plotting his assassination in 65 AD, along with Seneca and Lucan. And the G was used for C. His father's name was Gaius, but that also could be Caius. Ignatius means younger, so Ignatius means Pliny the Younger. I'm not sure where the ig comes from. The younger with boy inferred. Boy meant much the same thing as lad would mean later elsewhere. That is, it meant he is up for it, which means sex. And that is another aspect of this that Piso wants to bring up, is that these people were very much debauched and perverted, and many of them had sodomite slave boys that they carried around with them so that they could have sex with them anytime they wanted, and that was fine and dandy. But nonetheless, Pliny still did get banished to the hinterlands for a couple years for assaulting a young boy, which meant that he was assaulting an actual royal young boy, because it was fine to assault, the slave boys, but Pliny got punished for this one because he couldn't keep it in his pants long enough to wait till he could have sex with another slave. He had to do it with a royal. So these are the people that wrote your New Testament and that wrote all of your church fathers and your Apocrypha and all of the religious literature of this entire religion. And the evidence is right there in the text if you only know what to look for. I will be doing an episode at some point on all the pornography that's in the New Testament. There is a hidden meaning to Suetonius's saying boys will be boys. Polycarp, another church father, was Proculus, Calpurnius Caesar, Arius' son. In the New Testament, Paul, St. Ignatius of Antioch, St. Linus, Bishop of Rome. These are all Pliny. We also went as C. Plinius, Pontius, Secundus, L. Appius Maximus. He used Maximus a lot. Lappius Maximus, Terentius Maximus, Plinius Maximus, Messius Maximus, M. Laberius Maximus, A. Lappius Maximus, and the list goes on. Pomponius Secundus, he used Secundus a lot. That kind of implies the younger, or the second. Pliny's actual uncle was known as Pliny the Elder. He was in on it too in a much earlier period. I believe Pliny the Elder died at the hands of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. And let's see here. Now, Arius Calpurnius Piso was descended from Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and so he used the name Marcus. He also used Antonius or Aeneas. Let's see. Somebody married the father of Seneca. His name was Aeneas. Seneca's name was Aeneas. Seneca the Younger, who was also was executed by Nero in 65 AD. He was in on the plot as well. They tried to convince Nero to go for it, this new universal religion that they were concocting, and Nero wouldn't go for it. So they tried to assassinate Nero, and he found out about the plot, and he had them put to death. Arius Piso inserted Seneca's brother in the New Testament, and a nephew of Seneca, Lucan, was also famous in Roman literature. Seneca had married Paulina, and his sister was Aeneia, actually a queen named Arria the Elder. Arria the Elder was married to Emperor Vespasian's brother, Titus Flavius Sabinus. Arria the Younger, who married Gaius Calpurnius Piso, who was the father of Arius. The daughter of Arria the Younger is given as Fannia. This is another transposed version of Aeneas or Arius's name, an initial standing for Flavia, the F initial standing for Flavia, which is a dynasty of the Caesars there, which also means blonde or golden. Arius Antoninus, founder of the Antonine dynasty, and Arius Piso had sons and daughters. One daughter had sons from a previous marriage, and then was later married to Trajan. That's Claudia Phoebe. One of those sons wrote as Suetonius. So Suetonius was the grandson of Arius Piso, and he was also known as Emperor Antoninus Pius, and also as Pope Pius I. His brother wrote as both Appian and Arian. The Ninus portion of his name refers to Arius Piso playing the part of the baby Jesus in the New Testament. Ninus means baby boy. And he may have co-ruled with his uncle Vespasian, according to Arius. He did co-rule with Titus, but not with Domitian. Domitian had him banished. Arius Piso had him banished to the hinterlands when he came in, just after he came in I think 82 AD. But then he came back after they successfully assassinated Domitian in 95 AD, and he co-ruled with Nerva, who was kind of a figurehead that took up a couple years before Trajan came in, and Arius Piso was kind of the Henry Kissinger behind the scenes, co-ruling with Trajan as well, who was his son-in-law, and he also may have co-ruled briefly with Hadrian, but by that time Arius Piso was about 80 years old, so he died, I believe, in 118 AD, right around the time that Hadrian, just after the time Hadrian had come in. But Hadrian was married to Arius's granddaughter. So that's kind of that for the genealogical stuff. And after this, we're going to talk. He's going to be talking about the biblical dynasty, the creation of the Old Testament, and how that went down. I find that to be a little bit less compelling, and so I'll look over that and see what we're going to do with that. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in today. Like, share, subscribe. Come back tomorrow and learn more of this crypto history of pure conspiracy, the Roman origins hypothesis. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.